As Christian professors, how do you handle bias and assumption within yourself and like in class and what you're teaching and making sure that they're all understanding the course?
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Meet the Prof. My name is Shane, and my friend Spence and I take questions from college students, just like you heard from Cammie, and we will ask them to Christian professors. And our goal is to encourage Christ-centered conversations on the college campus. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. What would you think if you ran into a professor who burst into tears and you're at Disney World? Or what do you think could cause a professor to get an anonymous confrontational letter under their office door? Well, stay tuned for part one of our interview with Jeff Colbert. Jeff teaches political science at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And before we get started, please remember to click on subscribe or follow wherever you're watching or listening to this. And let's dive in. Here is part one of our interview with Jeff Colbert. Well, Jeff, welcome to Meet the Prof. I have really been looking forward to getting to interview you like this. So how are you doing?
I'm doing well, doing well. It's good to see you as well, Shane. It's been a while.
Yeah. And it's the first time Spence has met you. So good having y'all connected here.
Absolutely.
Hey, Jeff.
Good to see you, Spence.
So Jeff, you're in Greensboro, North Carolina. It's maybe 3.5 hours from us. What do you love so much about Greensboro?
Golly, I thought we only have an hour. I mean, you're in trouble now. No, it's interesting. I came to Greensboro when I transferred here to UNC Greensboro as a student back in '72, and I fell in love with Greensboro and have not fallen out of love since. I think one of the things I like about Greensboro, and I was actually talking with a friend of mine last week, Greensboro is a big town. It's technically a city, Charlotte, Raleigh, then we're Greensboro. We're a city, but the feel is more like a town. It's much more informal. Of course, my university is here. 95% of my family is here, and so my church is here. So, I can't imagine a scenario where I would leave Greensboro.
Well, tell us a little about your affection for Disney World.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was a kid, we did not travel a whole lot. We didn't do vacations much the way people did. And I remember the very first time I went to Disney, and we go through the Magic Kingdom, we walk through Cinderella's palace, and or the castle, and I see all the intricate detail of the building, and I literally started crying right there.
Wow.
I just could not imagine that I was in this location, and seeing all this cool stuff and really sort of becoming a child almost all over again.
Yeah.
We took our entire family down there. We had grandkids, that all of them had grandkids. My mom went, and oh shoot, I'm gonna cry. Dang. We went in and she stood there and she said, I never thought I'd get to come here. And I thought,
Wow.
this is gonna be a cool trip.
Yeah.
So it's just a place you can be a kid, so I always have enjoyed going there.
Don't feel bad crying. We try to get every professor to cry on the podcast. Spence is good at that. Well, so before we get into the next question, I want to welcome anyone who is logged in to watch this live. And Jeff, that we're trying something totally new with this interview where we've invited a handful of professors around the country if they wanted to put questions in the chat and hopefully interact some with us later. Jeff, this is coming. We've got to know, what's your most embarrassing moment you've had as a college professor?
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things. When you first started doing these, you asked about student, and
That's true.
I first started thinking about that, but the last few you've gone to professor. I'm loaded either way. But the professor one is really, I came instantly to mind. I make a point of I teach political science, make sure some people don't know that. And I make a point of seldom ever making predictions because I am ghastly wrong almost all the time. And so I just don't do it. When COVID broke, we had been on spring break the week before COVID. We came back on campus on that Monday, and there was all talked about closing and what's going to happen. And of course, we're still trying to figure out what COVID is and how bad it is and so forth. So I go into one of my classrooms on Monday morning, and they said, so Mr. Colbert, you think when are you going home? We're leaving today. What's going to happen? I said, look, calm down. Something as huge as a university and a university system cannot possibly just close like that. It'll be at least 2 weeks, maybe 3. Just relax. It's okay. The next day, the email came out that we were closing Friday of that week.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine when I went in that same class on Wednesday, well, they were waiting to ask me questions. Hey, Mr. Colbert, I thought you said. Yeah, I know. You're right. That's why I don't predict things in classrooms. So, yeah.
That's good for them to see. Professors don't know everything.
Nope.
Jeff, there's something about your story that is very unique. I think a lot of us hear about college students who may grow up in church and then when they go off to college, they lose their faith.
Uh-huh.
Your story on meettheprof.com is that you grew up in a church religious environment, but your freshman year is when you'd say you came to faith in Christ. So, will you tell us about how that happened for you?
We moved a lot when I was a kid for good and bad reasons, but we moved frequently.
Mhm.
And as soon as we moved, because mom couldn't drive, so she would find the nearest Southern Baptist church we could walk to. And that was where I was the next Sunday morning. So I was raised in the church. I heard all the things you needed to hear. And I was a pretty good kid. I mean, I didn't get into trouble for the most part. My parents divorced when I was 16, which meant from that moment forward, anything I screwed up devastated my mother. It just, I came in late from a ball game, like 15 minutes one night, and she'd already called the highway patrol to find out where I was. I mean, it was like she's boohooing on the couch. I'm going, oh golly, gee whiz. So I am looking forward to leaving Raleigh. Initially, later came to UNCG, but I went to Chapel Hill first,
Mhm.
and then it's like she wasn't going to see me unless I came home. And she was not going to know what I was doing unless I chose to confess, which I was not planning on doing.
Mhm.
So I am really looking forward. I've got a roommate, a guy named Bob Suttles, very moral person, if you will, but he was not a Christian either. And I am planning my freshman year, all the things I did not do in high school, I am going to do now. Midsummer, I get a phone call from Bob. First words out of his mouth, Jeff, I've been saved. To which my response was, from what? And he went in to tell me about he got involved with a group called the Navigators who work on college campuses and at military bases. And so he got involved with them. He had a conversion experience. And I'm thinking, oh no, I got Joe Christian as my roommate now. This is not what I was looking for, And mom loved him. And I knew if I went out partying, Bob would tell mom, oh, they're not good. Yeah. But because I'd always been going to church, so when he started going to Navigator meetings at Carolina, then I started going with him to Navigator meetings, and we had Bible studies and so forth. I wish to this day, I share oftentimes with young folks at church, anytime, whatever you make a decision to accept Christ, write that date down. You will always want to know when it is. And I don't do regrets much, but one of my regrets is that I did not write that date down. It was fall semester 1970, 1004 Morrison dorm on Chapel Hill's campus. I'm lying in bed at like 10 o'clock at night. And I say, God, okay, I'm yours. Okay. I understand now what I'm doing and what I did not do, I'm yours. And like for most adults, it was rocky road after that. I was nowhere close to perfect for quite some time, but it is interesting that I got saved at college as opposed to sort of pulling away because of college.
Can you identify anything that was going on your freshman year where there was like the final straw, the final break of a barrier to where you would come to faith in Christ personally?
Not really. I think probably because everything I had done in church up to that point was, because mom said you're going to go to church, kind of thing. And church, and I think this is true of a lot of churches, they're generally talking to the larger audience that's there on a Sunday morning, which typically is not 16 to 18-year-old kids. It's the adults in the room, which again, my church does that to a degree. I think most churches do. When I was in the Navigator group at Chapel Hill, it's just college kids. I mean, we're all on the same plane. The biggest difference is 4 years, freshman to senior. That's it. And they were talking to us where we live, with the things we're dealing with and so forth. So I think it just spoke to me in a different way than what it had ever happened before. And just sort of, okay, yeah, I gotta make a change. This is, I got to accept Christ. And so I did.
There's something powerful, it sounds like, for you being with other believers and
Yep.
your age, your season.
We've actually got a good question around this about some practical ways that you've expressed your faith to students, and maybe some stories about how that's made a difference.
Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah. I like that question.
Chris asked it.
Well, let me tell you a story. Shane actually has heard this story, but it's several years ago, so you might have forgotten it. In my early years of teaching, I think it's safe to say I was not a Christian influence in the classroom. I'm not sure I was a non-Christian influence, but I was definitely not a Christian influence. And I got an anonymous note from a Christian student who challenged some of the things I did in the classroom, because he said, you talk about being a Christian and being in church, but then you do these things and it was a spring semester, exams were, over or whatever. It slid under my door and I read that and I just bawled. Well, sometimes I need a sledgehammer, and that was my sledgehammer. So I turned to God and I said, okay, I will not be a negative influence anymore, and I want to be a positive influence. So show me what to do. And what happened next was the most uncomfortably silent 6 months I think I've ever gone through, because I'm ready. Show me what to do. And God's just going, God has his own timing. So we're talking like 8 months later. It's a Monday morning. I'm getting ready to walk into my classroom. And as I'm about to cross the threshold of the door, I hear God's voice say, ask them what they did over the weekend. Okay, I'm pretty sure I know who you are, but I literally backed out of the room. He's like, okay, all right. So I went into the classroom, set my stuff up, and because I normally chat for a minute or two before we get into the material. And says, so what'd y'all do this weekend? Hands go up, and once more, one kid said, I have no idea. I got drunk Friday. The same, right? Several went home, several went to a movie, whatever. And as this conversation is going, some student raises their hand. Mr. Colbert, what did you do this weekend? Light comes on. Okay. And I didn't start on Sunday. I started on Friday. Grandkids came over, spent the night, took them to Chuck E. Cheese, whatever it was on Saturday. But that got me to Sunday. So Sunday, I was in church. I go to Cornerstone Baptist Church. I sang in the choir. Oh, we did this cool song. It was so much fun to sing. And then went on. Okay, let's start class. And this is easy. I was thinking you had to do something like magical about this. And it's just a matter of conversation. And what I've started doing the last couple of years is on the first day of class, when I go over the syllabus, I will tell them, I'm a Christian. Now, here's why I'm telling you this. I'm not telling you, I'm going to hit you with my Bible next week. I don't do that. Being a Christian tells me how I'm supposed to live. Being a Christian tells me how I'm supposed to treat you.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be fair with you. That's to the best of my ability. I will be honest with you to the best of my ability. I will do everything I can that is acceptable and appropriate, whatever, for a professor to try to help you, get through this. I will listen to you if you have a problem. Whether I agree with what's going on or not is completely immaterial. You're one of my students. If you have a problem, you can come free. You're free to come talk to me. It's a safe space. I don't have to agree, whatever. And then I just move on, whatever. And at least at this point, I've not had anybody who found that objectionable. I've had some Christian students who have stopped by and have said, I have found students who have been in some distress and apparently felt comfortable enough to come at least talk with me about it for a few minutes. So there are just different ways that it can work in. When a student emails me and tells me they're sick, or maybe they're going to be out because there's been a death in the family, I always put in my email, I will be praying for you and your family. Let me know if there's anything else I can do. And I leave it at that. And I'm still waiting for the first email going, don't you dare pray for me. Most of my emails to my students end with have a blessed day, Jeff Colbert, or whatever. But the other thing I do is I listen for language. So, for example, blessed is a word that anybody is allowed to use, but also nobody uses it but Christians. And so if I had a soccer player in here, this is a number of years ago, she'd had a concussion. She had fallen behind. We had to meet, figure some things out. She's from California, so she was way far from home. And so we're just talking back and forth. And she said, I just feel so blessed by all the family around me and people helping me. I thought, well, you use the B word, so I'm going to follow up. And I said, I'm just curious, do you go to church, or you have faith or whatever? Oh yeah, I'm a Christian. I was involved in a church in California, and I'm looking for a church at Greensboro. Okay. So then we had a 20-minute conversation about our faith and so forth, and how it developed. And I think for me, I just had to have that awakening moment to where I'm willing to do what you give me an opportunity to do. And I ask the question most every Monday. I ask them what they did on the weekend. Seldom today does anybody ask me what I did. Every now and then somebody does, but normally not. And I don't worry about it. There are other ways to get the message out now.
You've shared a lot of things that didn't get pushed back. Another Chris in the chat wanted to know if you have experienced pushback. Have you ever gone over the line and a colleague or a student called you out on it?
I really don't think I have. Sometimes it's just sort of a non, response or whatever, which is okay. I do wear the WWJD bracelet, and I have different colors that match my shirts. And so sometimes students will go, I know what that is, and others will go, what is the bracelet thing? What is that about? And I'll just say, it says WWJD. What does that stand for? What would Jesus do? And so I wear it to remind me how I'm supposed to act. And sometimes they go, okay, or whatever, whatever. But I mean, no hostility back or whatever. So, and I know that my peers, at least the ones I interact regularly, they know how, they know what my belief is. If you're in my department, you don't know I'm a Christian, then we just hired you last week, because otherwise you would know. But I try to not be pushy about what I feel. People know, but at least to this point, I don't recall any getting any feedback or any pushback. And again, if you do, to Chris too, if you do get some feedback from pushback, well, okay, then re-examine what you're doing, and you might have been the offender in whatever. You might have done something differently, but it also may be, sometimes we get pushback, and okay, then you move on and not push back, but just keep doing what you're doing. We can't let, if a person complains out of the 500 that didn't complain, who is the one that should motivate our behavior? It should be the 500, not the one. We should examine to make sure, all right, did I cross a line? Because sometimes we can't. Did I do something inappropriate? Okay, yeah. Even though it was the one, still, I'm the one at fault. I need to back up. But I think more often than not, it probably would be something different.
Hey, I want to say thank you to both the Chris's for asking those questions. And anyone else in the audience, feel free to put questions in the chat at any time. And at the very end, we'll open it up for any call-ins if you have a video camera and you want to call in. So we'll tell you how to do that. So Jeff, Spence and I have gone around and asked college students what questions they'd want to ask Christian professors. And so there's this one young lady we talked to named Cammie, and she asked this question about bias.
As Christian professors, how do you handle bias and assumption within yourself and like in class and what you're teaching, and making sure that everyone, even if they have different worldviews and different mindsets, that they're all understanding the course?
Cool. Okay. Interesting question. It has been recent, but there was a class I taught. This was before COVID. And I had two young men in the class. They were both Muslim. They were clearly very, very good friends. And they had asked to be off for 1 or 2 days for a little holiday. And I said, sure. And I asked them what it was. And it's a holiday I recognized as a Muslim holiday. And I said, if you guys would like to, I would love to chat with you about your faith. And I'm not going to try to convince you. I don't know a lot about your faith, and I would love to learn some things. Would that be okay? And they said, sure. And so they came in and we had a great conversation. And they started off with, said, well, we're not exactly practicing Muslims. Okay, well, frankly, for a while, I wasn't exactly a practicing Christian. So I understand where you're coming from. And so we talked about some similarities and some differences and so forth. And it was a good conversation. But I tried to make people feel comfortable in the classroom. Obviously, in my universe, it's much more from the political perspective. I don't tell students who I register with, who I vote for. I make fun of Democrats and Republicans, so it's hard to, oh, he must be one. I was teaching a class called Political Issues, and we deal with pretty controversial political topics in there, but we talk about political philosophy early in the course and learn how to talk with people and not argue and yell and so forth. And I had a student in my class that was, who are you supporting? I said, I told y'all, I do not talk about this in class. I'm not going to tell you. And he would regularly ask will you tell us now? No, you're never going to learn. I just want you to know. So the semester's over. Last exam, he's turned his paper in. He said, Mr. Colbert, you've got to tell me who you're supporting. And I said, well, A, I ain't got to tell you nothing. And B, why you want to know so badly? Nobody else here cares. And it turned out that he and his roommate, who also was in the class, they sat side by side. They both were convinced that they knew who I was going to support. And one kid was absolutely convinced I was a Ted Cruz supporter. And the other was convinced I was a Bernie Sanders supporter. And I thought, wow, I'm doing better than I thought I was. This is incredible. People don't come to my class for the express purpose of hearing what I think about Democrats and Republicans, or for that matter, Christians and Muslims or whatever. They come generally my American upper class to get some basic information about American government. And as I tell them on the first day of class, if you think Donald Trump is horrible, if you think Donald Trump is great, when your hair color is my hair color, he's just a name in a history book. But if you don't know how the presidency operates, if you don't know how a bill becomes a law, if you don't know how the courts work, you're going to be a lousy citizen and you're not going to understand anything going on. So I'm going to teach you structure, and we'll use examples of what's going on in politics. Sure. I mean, I've never talked about checks and balances more than I have this semester. But that's okay. That's the conditions require that. And I don't do it from a way that is argumentative or attacking. So I hope that that doesn't become an issue. But I recognize from the very beginning, it's not, my beliefs are strongly held, but God will make it clear to me who needs to hear those strongly held beliefs.
Well, we'll pause there, and I can certainly see where students would feel comfortable in Jeff's classes. And thank you for joining us. Thanks for listening. And if you please remember to like or subscribe or follow. And if you are a Christian professor, please check us out on meettheprof.com and consider telling some of your spiritual journey there. It's real easy to click and create your own profile. And if you are a college student and you're hearing this, please check out Meet the Prof to see if there are any Christian professors in your area. And lastly, if you're interested in giving financially to this ministry, thank you so much. And you can give online at give.cru.org. Cru is CRU.org/0424344. So till next time, we hope this encourages you to have a Christ-centered conversation on your college campus.